This is the second of my lectures on the ancient Near East, and I promise that this one will be shorter than the first. In this lecture, we move from the Sumerians and the Akkadians to the Babylonians. By the way, there's some people in between, and to add to confusion, you have the old Babylonians, followed by the Assyrians and some other groups, and then the new Babylonians, and finally the Persians. You don't really have to keep all of that straight, but you should have in mind which artifacts are associated with Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. Before I get into that panoply of civilizations, let me review something I talked about in my last lecture, which is iconography, or the use of symbols to convey certain ideas. So why do you see so many bulls, so many lions, and so many suns in Near Eastern art? Well, bulls are traditionally a symbol of virility, the king demonstrating his ability to carry on with his kingdom or empire. Lions are, of course, both fearsome and powerful, and the sun is probably the central natural phenomenon, although I'd note that the ziggurat of Ur is dedicated to that city's patron god, which is the moon god. So let's begin with the Babylonians, who do not immediately succeed the Akkadians, but are the next civilization that you really have to worry about. And here we see the upper portion of the stele of Hammurabi. And of course, Hammurabi is most famous for his law code, which was really a compilation of laws from earlier civilizations. But it was the first time that you had a clear codification of a legal system. And again, the iconography on the top of this stele is quite interesting. It's a little hard to see some of this, but you see the son of Babylon, which is how Hammurabi describes himself in the inscription to this. He is the son of Babylon, but he is also approaching the sun god, Shamash. And he also describes himself as the shepherd who brings peace, whose scepter is just. In other words, he is claiming legitimacy for his regime first on the basis of having found favor with the god and being willing to submit himself to the god, that is Shamash, and his second claim to legitimacy, to a right to rule, is that he is just, that he enforces laws impartially on all people, although in fact punishments were harsher under the Code of Hammurabi for ordinary folks than for the nobility. Why is Hammurabi standing? By the way, Hammurabi is the figure on the left. Well, one stands as a gesture of respect, and so the seated god is the figure of greater authority in this picture. Notice that the king also is raising his hand. That's also a gesture of respect or submission. It's a little hard to see this in the image, but Hammurabi is receiving two things from Shamash, a ring and a scepter. Again, those are iconographic symbols. They stand for rule or authority. Here we see a larger picture of the stele, and here's a vocabulary word worth knowing. Investiture is when a ruler is granted the right to rule. We will see any number of investitures when we get to later European art. Good term to know for this. Here again we see another, I should have taken out the image that says flashcard, another set of pictures of the stele with the law code of Hammurabi. Just a couple of points that this makes. You see again the composite view, the twisted profile, and you see a hierarchy of scale, but that's actually rather, I shouldn't have gone forward yet, but that's rather an interesting point. How much larger than Shamash the sun god is Hammurabi? I think the answer is he's not that much larger, which is an indication that although Hammurabi acknowledges that he is in obedience to the god, that the god is greater than he is, he's not a whole lot smaller. He is a very important figure himself. Okay, now we will move on to the Assyrians and the Lamassu. Now, you all know a great deal about this at this point because you just wrote an essay about it after, I hope, listening to that very interesting Khan Academy lecture. Let me point out that this is probably the most famous artwork of the Assyrians. The Assyrians were a highly warlike people. They were famous throughout the region for their fearsomeness, for the punishment they inflicted on their enemies. These are the folks in the bad guys, if you will, in the story of Judith and Holofernes. And they're all over the Old Testament, basically picking on the Israelites and everyone else. And here you see something, a symbol that's obviously meant to convey this fierceness. And we will talk I hope in your essay you will have talked about some of the ways that this conveys it. Here are some more pictures. So what are some of the points that I included in my comments on your essay, which you should have pulled up after you submitted it? So you see the focus on the king himself as a god, not as a king serving God. This is a combined natural and supernatural figure, again, showing that the king is somehow embodying both his human quality and his divine quality. This is a way in which the Assyrians, like the Akkadians, differ from the Sumerians. The figure is huge. It's a monstrous guardian, as described in your book. Again, this is meant to convey the power and authority of the Assyrian rule. The human head affixed to the body of a powerful beast. Bulls and lions, as I've already talked about, these are iconographic symbols associated with power and with kingship. An interesting feature of this that I thought was talked about well in the Khan Academy lecture is that this strange beast has 5 legs, so that you see 2 legs from the front, and then when you walk around to the side, you see 4 legs. I think this is designed, or at least I'm picking up on what the lecture said that you listened to last night. This is an animal that follows you around, that moves with you as you approach its presence. This was very much designed to intimidate, to impress, to scare, to overwhelm, to awe the people who would who would be entering the throne room of the king, which is where it was placed. Now, I'm also not going to talk very much about the reliefs from the palace of Ashur-nasir-pal, although I would note that the Lamassu, let's go back and look at that again, is high relief. It is not in the round. It's still carved out of the stone, but it comes out quite a long way. It's almost, it's 3-dimensional, and it comes out a significant distance from the stone, whereas the registers, the narrative tales of power and glory of the palace of Ashur-nasir-pal are low relief. They don't extend very far out from the wall. It's a freeze technique. You're going to see here, I think, a very interesting explanation of these friezes and get really good close-ups of that in the video that Ms. Jacobs is going to show you in just a few minutes. Here are a few more images, but again, you're going to see more of those, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is a very famous work. It's one that could easily show up on your AP test, will almost certainly show up on your unit test. By the way, I hope that you're going to take advantage of the image self-test quizzes. I've got the first one, which is chapter 1 and 2, up on Moodle now. These will not be graded. I will not be recording any grade from them. You can take them as many times as you want. But I think it's an excellent way to review the images before the unit test and then again later before the AP test. So again, I hope people will take advantage of this resource. It took a fair amount of time to put it on Moodle, so please use it. And now we're moving on to the Babylonians. Didn't we just do Babylonians? Well, this is a little confusing. These are the Neo-Babylonians, a later Babylonian kingdom. Basically, this Mesopotamia throughout this period has a succession of ruling empires. Some are city-states, some are empires. This is another Babylonian empire. Babylon at its height was one of the great cities of the world. Its hanging gardens were one of the ancient wonders of the world. And this Ishtar Gate ushered people into this magnificent city. And like the Lamassu was designed to impress. You see on it the iconic lions, the symbol of Babylon and the symbol of strength. This is another mud city. Remember, this is Mesopotamia, and there's not a lot of natural stone. But the glazed brick is designed to give the impression of stone. It would be very bright. It would catch the sun. It would, again, awe and maybe slightly terrify people who are entering. And finally, our last set of images is from Persia. And actually, Persia is included because it is, in fact, the Near East. But these are really symbols from the classical era. We will get to Persia when it's having battles with Greece, and Greece is in our next unit. But here you see Persepolis, the royal capital of Persia, and you see some standard Near Eastern features. You see the symmetrical, iconic bulls. You see the narrative frieze with registers, but you also see some Greek influence in the rounded columns, and it's even clearer here in the way the drapery in the clothing of the people is shown somewhat more realistically. And yet, again, you see the iconic Near Eastern beards, you see the composite figures, the very symbolic and stylized approach, the friezes. So this is kind of a transitional piece, but we're not moving on to Greece yet. Our next civilization, a very exciting one, will be Egypt.